Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is going to be a Q&A live stream. We've got no particular agenda for this other than a whole page of questions that I've already got through from my patrons and on Twitter. Guys, so the way we're going to do this is we're just going to rattle through as many of these different questions, throw any questions at us that you want to. And I say us because I've got a last minute guest on. Some of you may have seen over on Twitter. One of my favorite people in the community, and a man, it has to be said, with the finest headgear possibly on all of YouTube. Guys, would you please welcome LML? Do you want to say hi, LML?
I do want to say hi, and also future sanity, virtual insanity. Oh, that was for you. You requested the dance. This is, of course, the Jameer Quope, not the Jameer Quai. It's the Jameer Quope because I've got the. Yeah, well, you get it. But yeah, I thought I'd, bring something a little bit interesting for you, Robert. I couldn't just come on out here, with my half shave that I do, but throw on a hat for you. Yeah.
It's looking gorgeous, I have to say. But as you know, if you're a regular watching my live streams, I only invite people on here if I personally recommend and rate what they do. And LML produces some of the most original and I don't think he'll take it in an offensive way, slightly different ways of looking at A Song of Ice and Fire to most other people. He comes at things from a completely different angle. So if you want something that's looking at the sort of the mythical astronomy, a lot of the not just foreshadowing, but what are the meta messages that are being transmitted through the books that George R.R. Martin is playing with, then please do go and check out Lucifer Means Lightbringer. He can advertise it for himself later, but he's on YouTube, he's got a podcast, he's got a blog, he's got everything going on. But guys, I said there's no particular agenda here. It's just going to be questions, and I've got a whole load in front of me. I'm going to prioritize questions. If there are any super chats, we'll come to them straight away. And I just want to quickly say thanks to Maura Lee, who I spotted put in a super chat before we started, but without a question. But thank you, Maura. That's incredibly kind. Questions from my patrons I've got here. And also, if I can spot them as they go through, any questions from my excellent moderators, who I don't thank enough. But thank you so much for the wonderful work you do. So let's start off with just random. The first one that we get here, Alison Mutlu, one of my patrons, says, hi Robert, I'd like to know your theory on what is going to be the third twist in the show. Would it be pertaining to the Night King story arc? Like, is there some kind of big missing link here? This, I think, is something that the showrunners have said about there being 3 big twists. I think we can assume that this, as it's a big twist, this is something that is going to be in the books as well. So why don't you kick us off with this one, LML? What do you think is going to be the big twist that we're going to see in season 8 / the last book or 2?
Moon meteors. Next question.
You may need to expand on that a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I know I said short and snappy, but
I'm just trying to calibrate it. I'm trying to find the right. If we're talking about the show, I'm not sure if they're going to give me my moon meteors. I do think TWOW will give them to me, because that's how the last long night started, and so I think if I'm right about that, and Martin was thinking about moon meteors causing the last long night, then we'll get those for the new long night. But as far as you mentioned the Night King, and when I think about the show, I think that the biggest mystery now for the next season is who was Night King before he was held up tied to that tree and transformed with the dragon glass by the children of the forest. Is he just a random schmo, or more likely does his story before that moment have some sort of relevance? Was he a Stark? Was he a Green Seer? Something along those lines, I would think.
I think I'd agree with that, and I think that so the big twist will be us understanding that they're not just the big baddies. I think this is definitely going to be the case in the books, and I hope it's going to be the case on the show as well, that they're going to show us that everyone is a hero in their own story. This is something that George R.R. Martin says a lot. There is a reason why the White Walkers, the others, are doing what they're doing, and it's not just because they woke up one morning, felt a bit grumpy, and thought, hey, why don't we go kill some humans? There's more to their story than that, and I think that is going to be the big twist. I think that we will find out, actually, that we may not sympathize with them, but we do understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that will be the big twist. And it may well, as you say, be connected to their creation. In fact, I'm sure you're right, it will be connected to their creation. Perhaps connected to this, as a second question from Brian Price, one of my most recent moderators. Although I should just quickly say, Catherine Bassett, thank you very much for the super chat. £5, that's very kind. Just saying, because the 90s rocked. Absolutely, they did. And maybe at the end we'll get a little bit more of the Jamiroquai dancing, but hold off for the moment. But Brian Price, one of my recent patrons, just asked, how far south do you predict that the Army of the Dead will go in season 8? And I think we can probably take this in both the books and on the show. On the show, I'm convinced they're going to go to King's Landing, because that's going to be the biggest spectacle. And I think that's where we're going to see huge battles going on there. In the books, I think that the target is more the Isle of Faces, and I think King's Landing's more of a bit of a sideshow as far as the White Walkers and the others are concerned. So that's where I think they are at. I think that they're moving south for a purpose, and I think that it will be a slightly different purpose in the books and on the show. But what do you think, LML?
Oh, I love that you mentioned the God's Eye. I think that's one of the things that early in the books you can see Martin alluding to it a lot. Back when he thought it was going to be like a trilogy or a shorter series or whatever, and then we haven't heard about it as much. But he keeps dropping little references to it. Like even when Jon's north of the Wall, Grigg the Goat talks about wanting to see the God's Eye and the Isle of Faces and the Green Men. Like the legend of the Green Men is so old and wide that even the wildlings know about it. And he has said that we're going to see the Green Men or the Isle of Faces, or we're going to go there, or something that's going to come to the fore, or he said something like that. So I absolutely agree with you. I don't think King's Landing is nearly as important as the Isle of Faces. The Isle of Faces is like the locus point of the entire Weirwood net. There's a reason why we haven't seen it yet. It's going to be pretty amazing and important. And I like the idea that that's the target of the others. Yeah, if they really want to kill the Weirwood net, which I think they might want to, then that would probably be the place to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So I think on the show, we will definitely see them go down as far south as King's Landing. I think somebody somewhere might have been connected with this, asked, are we going to be seeing much of Dawn in season 8? And I think the answer is probably no. I think that Dawn has done its bit for the show. Whether we liked it or not is another matter, yeah. But I don't think that they're going to be going down further south than King's Landing there. Okay, so we're going to move around all over the place. So this time we're going to go Mary Montgomery, another one of my more recent patrons who I see was out there in the chat. So hi, Mary, great to see you. Saying, what do you think that the Three-Eyed Raven meant when he said that Jojen Reed died so Bran could find what he had lost? What did he lose? Now, Mary quotes a couple of other excellent YouTubers, Grey Area and Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel, with their theories on this. But I just want to take your thought on this. First of all, I haven't had a chance to quickly look. Is that said in the books? Can you remember? Or is this just a quote from the show?
Read the quote again.
The Three-Eyed Raven went talking about Jojen dying, saying he died so that Bran could find what he had lost.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not in the books.
No,
in the books, his death is entirely. Oh, I'm sorry, his death. It's unconfirmed in the books. His death. It's some. He disappears amidst some heavy foreshadowing, and Bran eats the paste, and we're all wondering if Jojen is dead or bleeding out or what. Yeah, we have no idea. So Blood Raven definitely has not commented on that.
No,
however, it's probably true though, right? Like in general, Jojen is sacrificing himself so that Bran can become who he wants to become, right?
I think that's right. I think that it's the wording that Mary was trying to get across here, which is so that Bran could find something that he'd lost. Now, the question is, what is it that he'd lost? Because if it's just him blossoming into all his tree wizard powers, then that's not a thing that he'd lost in the past, because he was just a little kid. He'd never had that before.
Okay.
Is there a particular thing somehow other than perhaps his direction in life, because thought he knew what he wanted to do in life, and then he was, oh, woe is me, I can't walk, I don't have a family. I'm being facetious. He clearly was having a bad time, but then he'll get a purpose again once he goes through the training. So do you think it might be that, or is there another thing that he has lost in some way?
I couldn't begin to guess. I'm not super into the time travel theories. I'm sort of like waiting for them to show us what, both book and show, what they're going to do with that. But it just breaks everything open when you start introducing that in a theoretical sense. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I'd agree there. I'm also not so much into the time travel theories. I think that a couple of the people that Mary was quoting were slightly more interested in this possibility that this is something that Bran has got stuck in the past or something like that. I don't personally see many hints for that in the books or indeed on the show. I think that we pick up on a lot of the hints that the Night King, slight digression here, but I think it's quite an important one in understanding this. The Night King seems to be a Stark, or at the very least one of the first men, but he seems to be a Stark, and therefore we make the leap to say it must therefore be a Stark that we know about, given the fact that we know that Bran can move through or can look at things at different periods of time. And we've had a couple of references from Old Nan, for example, to whether or not she can tell the difference between all the different brands, because they all run one into another as far as she's concerned. So I don't personally see huge amounts of evidence for there being a time travel thing going on there, but hey, the show could take this one any which way.
It could still be, if I could just say something slightly more productive than what I said earlier. It could be that they're speaking of like the Stark family losing, finding something that they had lost, like their connection to the old gods. It could be something a little bit more like that, less personal to Bran and more personal to the Starks, and Bran as a symbolic Stark, perhaps.
Yeah, I think he's certainly Bran is certainly a symbolic Stark, and he's certainly symbolic with Bran the Builder. I think that there's certainly a symmetry that they're bringing up there, both with this sort of hints of magic and a sort of a beginning and an end of this story arc for the Starks, as it were. But yeah, I don't think that we necessarily have to see the one as exactly the same as the other. Can I just pick up on? I did see a couple of Q&As go by asking about leaks, which I've gone public a while ago. For those who are perhaps newer to my channel, on this channel, I'm not going to be covering any of the leaks. I'm not going to be covering any of the set photos or any of that kind of thing. It's very hard to avoid, so obviously I can't promise that none of my guests on here will never say anything, or somebody tweets at me won't say something. But as far as I'm concerned, none of my videos and none of my live streams are covering the leaks. So if you want to have a leak-free place, this is it for you. No judgment here from me about the leaks. If there are plenty of places to go if you want to go and look through all of that, but I just wanted to make sure that this is a safe space for people. So if you're wanting leaks, sorry, I'm not going to be commenting on them. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's quite a fine line, I appreciate, between what makes sensible predictions in the light of what we know and what leaks are coming through. But I'm trying my best wherever possible never to mention what's the leaks are. So that's my position on it, and plenty of other places to go and get that. Okay, let's take a slightly different random question then. This one was from Twitter, Simon Barth, and this one perhaps LML you can go off on a little bit more of a monologue on this one. We were joking about this one before. This is about numbers, and this is Simon Barth says about the could we talk about the importance of numbers in the world of Ice and Fire? The examples given here are the 13th Lord Commander, the number 7, not just in the Faith of the Seven, but Melisandre was lot number 7. We've got the Lord Commanders of the Night Watch. We're up to coming towards 1,000. What's the significance broadly in your mind of numbers within the story?
Well, so numbers would just be one way of communicating symbolism. Like when you're doing symbolism, it's the color, it's the thing, whether that's like an animal or an object, it's the position of the thing or animal, it's the what's around it. Is it stars or trees, or is it two things combatant? Then you start getting into colors, as far as what colors things are, and then numbers, how many there are and how many of each thing there is. So when I look at symbolism, which is mostly how I look at the books, like you were alluding to earlier, numbers are simply just part of that. I will say that I'm skeptical. Numbers are always the last thing that I use to go on, because they're the easiest. Like, what does three heads of the dragon mean? Or if you're looking through the books for examples of things that symbolize the three heads of the dragon or the three forging attempts of Lightbringer, it could be any damn thing because there's so many threes. So it's easier to work with numbers that aren't three. But like I said, I'm usually a little bit hesitant to conclude anything off of numbers. So they're like the last thing I look at. If I notice something that seems to be a dragon and it happens to have that three-headed symbolism, well, then I'll go ahead and say, well, this is a three heads of the dragon thing. But I won't start with keying off of the numbers. One thing I mentioned, like, there's a lot of weird coincidences, Robert. Like, for example, there's 19 forts on the wall, and Craster has 19 wives. Does that mean anything? I'm not sure. I mean, it's like, depends on the context. You have to look at the quotes and stuff. Or the Iron Islands has 44 islands, but it's actually 31 and 13 in the Lonely Light. But the thing is that there's also 33 weirwoods, or 31 weirwoods at the High Heart. Does that mean anything? Because the Iron Islands have those Naga's ribs, which are like weirwood trees, kind of. So I don't know. Like, there's a lot of numbers connections that I've noticed that they tickle you, but until I have a theory that explains it first, and then the numbers sort of fit into the theory, I don't really. I sort of leave those to the back because they're just so subjective, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. Thank you. I think that numbers are used by George R. R. Martin uses numbers the same way at a sort of a high level that say the Bible would use numbers, and in a sort of a figurative sense, using numbers. If you read through the Bible, you get recurrences of numbers like 12 and 40 and 1,000 and 3, and these are numbers which are used across all types of literature to show echoes of different things. So you get in the Bible, this isn't a Bible study by any means, but if you look at when Jesus is picking 12 disciples, that is a deliberate echo of the 12 tribes of Israel. So there is an attempt there to make you think back to the previous thing that you've read about or seen or heard about. And I think that is what George R. R. Martin quite often does, is he is using numbers as ways to sort of echo stuff. So you start to think about 7, you immediately think about the faith of the 7. So is there a link there when he talks about there being 7 of something? And I think he also tries to use it in the way that he uses so much with like prophecy. It's not about whether or not the thing itself is true, it's about how people react to it. So the fact that 6 rubies have washed up on the Quiet Isle doesn't, and they're eagerly waiting their 7th, because 7 is the holy number in the faith of the 7. Actually, the important point is that they believe that, not the actual number that have come there, whether or not that's a significant thing. So that's the way through it he goes. He uses numbers to help us try and think about other things and how people react to those things, if that makes sense.
And I'll just add that there are some numbers that seem to be ties to external mythology, like 7, for example. The 7 deities of the faith of the 7 are tied to the idea of the 7 celestial wanderers, because George states that the wanderers are sacred to each one of, the faith. The red wanderer belongs to the smith, so on and so forth. So there are certain concepts like that. Like number 9 is a pretty heavy symbol. It's tied to a lot of world mythology. So some of the 9s are pretty interesting. Like there's 9 ring wraiths, for example, in Lord of the Rings, and then the King of Winter, his crown has 9 black swords. But there's a lot of other connections between the Kings of Winter and the ring wraiths. that that my friend Blue Tiger could go into, for example. Shout out to the Tolkienic Song of Ice and Fire blog, where he does Lord of the Rings Song of Ice and Fire crossovers. So there's numbers like that. And by the way, my friend Amanda from the Disputed Lands filled me in on what I was trying to say earlier, which is that there are 44 ribs on Naga's ribs. There are 44 islands in the Iron Islands. And then H'ghar of the Hill also had 44 sons. And I don't know what that means or if those are connected, but it does seem like George is, like you said, using numbers to make us link certain things together and think about them. Like, for example, my tinfoil is that they broke apart the Iron Islands Peninsula with some sort of magic ceremony, and like the number of ribs dictated the number of islands, and then the lightning came down, and yeah, that's probably not what happened. So
it's all about the lightning and the meteors and things coming down from the skies. It's yeah. I mean, the last thing on the numbers, because I think it is a fascinating subject, is that the numbers of the Lord Commander, when we get J.R. Mormont was 997, and then you get Jon Snow was 998, and then obviously on the show we've got Ed, who's now 999. That is a deliberate thing to make us think that 1,000 is some sort of significant end point or a significant point in some way. And if it was just some completely random, they were the 756th and the 750th, then we wouldn't think anything about it at all. But George R. R. Martin is using the number there to try and build us up to this kind of millennial feel that perhaps this is an end or a significant point. So it's a deliberate use of a number there to try and create an atmosphere of what's going on. Odia de Verity, found it hard to pronounce your name there for a moment. £10, thank you so very much. Saying no leaks. How about carrots? Plenty of carrots on here. Thank you very much for that. That's very kind. I did promise LML when he came on that I have got a question that he will love, and this question comes from Mighty Hokey on Twitter. And the question is, and I'm just going to sit back and read my way through some of the chat here, because I know that this is a thing that he'll be able to talk about. Do dragons come from space is the question. And Myth says that the moon cracked and rained dragon eggs, or did they evolve from the fireworms in the earth? So LML, here you go. It's the kind of question I know you love. Do dragons come from space?
No, they do not. They do not. The dragons are said to come from the moon, but those, of course, are talking about moon meteor dragons. However, I will say something interesting, and I guess I'm just sort of running by my theory really quick, assuming y'all know that. But yeah, throughout world history, people have looked at meteors and shooting stars and described them as fiery snakes and dragons. And so the myth about dragons coming from the moon, if you don't know my basic theory, is really just a mythicized remembering of some sort of celestial catastrophe, which resulted in a fairly significant meteor shower, which actually I think was the cause of the long night. But one thing I will point out about is the idea of dragons coming from the moon. This is an idea Martin is getting from Lovecraft to some extent. In Lovecraft, in The Doom That Came to Sarnath in particular, but also in other stories, he's got this idea that there are monsters who live on the dark side of the moon, and that in the dream world, you can sort of go there and visit. And there are a couple of stories where people go to the dark side of the moon and find these freaky squisher-like monsters. And in The Doom That Came to Sarnath, the monsters come down from the moon one fortuitous night and basically wipe out an entire city, kind of like a Sodom and Gomorrah type of story. And so this idea of monsters coming from the moon is something that Martin wanted to play with, but in his story, I mean, A Song of Ice and Fire just isn't that much of a high fantasy where monsters literally fly from outer space or whatever. But he took that idea and used it as the cover story for the moon meteor thing, which is a little more plausible and practical. So.
Excellent. I think that's a great answer. I have no better answer than that on where dragons came from. I have to say, I tend to think of this man here and Aziz as my dragon experts, and so whatever they say, I will just believe. We've had a great question in the chat that I just was picking up on just there, which was Susan Dunkel. Hi, Susan. Good to see you. Saying, what do you think Ned meant when he thought about broken promises? Now, this, I think, is a great question. I'll have a first bash at this, and then LML, I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts on this one as well. The context for this, for those, it comes out who haven't read the books, it comes out a lot more in the books, is that Ned, when he's alive, yes, he has the recollections of Lyanna saying, "Promise me, Ned," but he also quite a few times has thoughts about broken promises. Now, this is quite interesting. I think it's very interesting because if you just take the narrative at a high level, what we've been told so far, you have Ned promising Lyanna that A, he would take her bones back and bury them up in the Winterfell crypts, which he did, and B, that he would take Jon and protect him and raise him and stop him being killed by Robert Baratheon, which he did. So the question here is, what on earth is it that is nagging at the back of his brain about broken promises? Because he kept those promises. So I think this is a fascinating question because clearly there is something going on here. I wonder whether part of it might be that when he's having these thoughts, it's mostly at the end when he's down in the dungeons in King's Landing, and therefore he's thinking he's not going to be able to see Jon again. And
Bingo.
We remember from when he last saw Jon, he said, "When I next see you, I promise I'll tell you about your mother." So that is a broken promise, and it might also have been a broken promise to Lyanna that he would tell Jon his heritage when it was safe again. So I think that may well be it. But I also think, and I'm going to get into this, I've started a series on my take on Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy, and everything that happened around that period. I think that there's also another layer here about Daenerys that I'm going to try and get into in a video, which is he starts these thoughts about broken promises the moment that Robert Baratheon is starting to talk about sending assassins after Daenerys. So it's not just about protecting Jon, it's also about protecting Daenerys. But at that point, I'm going to throw this one over to LML. So have you got any thoughts on what these broken promises might be?
Well, I was going to go with something similar as far as, it's a matter of telling Jon who he is. That would be the most sort of straightforward guess, probably. I didn't really have anything beyond that. I don't know that I even have an opinion on your tinfoil about Ned protecting Daenerys or reinstalling a Targaryen monarchy or wherever you're going with that. I'm not really sure. I'll wait to see, I guess, your case for that. But I would just say it's probably the obvious thing of he didn't get to tell Jon who he is.
Yeah, I don't think, just to be clear, I don't think there's any way that Ned was about trying to restore a Targaryen monarchy. I think that at the very least, he thought that if Robert Baratheon was still in the mood for killing random Targaryens, perhaps then it wasn't safe for him to be able to tell Jon Snow about his parentage, because Robert Baratheon might try and get him killed as well. So I think that's at the very least, I think that's one of the things that's going on there. But I think there is slightly more to this story than we have been told already. There's been a huge amount of story about what happened at the Tower of Joy, and also I think at the tourney at Harrenhal, that we can pick out and make logical guesses and assumptions based on that we do not yet know for sure because we haven't been told it. So I'm aiming wherever possible not to go down a tinfoil route with this one. I'm going to try and see where the facts lead us on this one. The only tinfoil I ever subscribe to in any way, shape, or form is, if in doubt, blame Bloodraven.
So hey, Robert, somebody's just sent me a super chat on your channel somehow. It asks Brian Price, says, "What's the deal with Asshai? What's the source of its power?" Seems like a question for me.
Well, you by all means answer.
So I think there's two things to talk about. One is moon meteors, and because in Lovecraft stories, meteors from space are often a source of weird supernatural dark energy. And we have the Bloodstone Emperor in the myth of the Great Empire of the Dawn, who is said to have caused the Long Night and then taken power and ruled during the Long Night with dark sorcery. And he was said to worship a black stone that fell from space. So right in that sort of area, and by the way, I think the Great Empire of the Dawn was Asshai, same thing essentially. We have a magical black stone being worshipped by a dark lord. So if my moon meteor theory is at all correct, I would tend to think that Asshai is the most likely impact zone. I think there's probably a couple, but certainly the entire dark shadow that hangs over the entire peninsula can be explained by something like a magic space meteor that's evil and toxic. And the other thing to talk about is the idea of hinges of the world. Melisandre calls the wall a hinge of the world, and meaning that it's something that amplifies magic. Even though the wall's made of ice, it makes her fire magic stronger. So there's some sort of basic magical power that's oozing from this hinge of the world. And she says her spells are stronger here even than at Asshai, which sort of implies that Asshai is also a hinge of the world, which would kind of make sense, whether it's Asshai or the shadow that's by Asshai, who knows. But I would say that it's possible that Asshai was already a natural source of power that was perhaps corrupted by the moon meteors, kind of like the heart of winter. Maybe it was the heart of summer, and then it got twisted. Because the last point I'll make, Robert, is that Asshai is the largest city in the world several times over, and it's built entirely of greasy black stone, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Now it's inhabited by a very small group of dark sorcerers who practice magic there, and it's unhealthy. Children and animals can't live there. So it doesn't make sense that anyone would build the world's largest city just to have a place to study dark magic. Like, it seems to make a lot more sense to me that the city was originally built out of something a bit more pleasant than oily black stone, that it was once a metropolis. It has thick land walls like a metropolis would. So you picture it as an Atlantis type of thing that then was corrupted and darkened with this magic. And so the stone probably then turned oily. The shadow hangs over the whole thing, and now it's the way it is. So the source of power is either just the meteor, or it's a natural source of power that was corrupted by the meteor, in my sort of headcanon.
I think I would actually agree with that. It's terribly boring when I agree with you, LML. I'm sorry about this, but yeah, I think that's right. I think that the one of the sources of, and George R. R. Martin, incidentally, he doesn't get into huge amounts about the sources of magic and all the rest of it. Somebody was asking today again on Twitter about the seasons and what made them like that. And George R. R. Martin does just do the standard because it's a magical world. That's what he says. He doesn't get into the science behind the magic, as it were. But trying to join up the dots, I completely agree that there is the black stone that we see in lots of different places across the planet. This seems to be it seems to have come from the skies in some way, and this does seem to be some sort of source of magic. When the red comet goes overhead, that also seems to be some sort of cause of magic. So there is definitely some sort of heavenly magical boost that is given, as it were, to what's going on Planetos and the world of ice and fire. I just want to very quickly pick up on we've had a few super chats while we've been talking. Jared McKinnon, thank you very much, saying, can't listen now, but this will get me through my workday tomorrow. Always great to see you two together. I always love having LML on. This was quite a last minute decision to have him on, but it would have just been me talking, and that would have got a bit dull, and you would have missed out on the hat. So that's fantastic. We also, so Brian Price, thank you again. It was one of my patrons. That was the question about Asshai, $9.99. Thank you. That's very kind. Who else have we got? Colleen Vanderpass.
Wow. Sorry, go ahead.
Colleen Vanderpass, $14.99, saying thanks for the Q&A. I posted some questions on the Patreon page. Yes, I think I've tried to pick up on these ones. If I don't, do shout, and I will definitely answer them on the Patreon page later today or tomorrow. printed out a whole load of these ones, so if you missed it, then I apologize, but I will definitely answer all of the questions that I've got here. And what else have we got? Well, I'm sure I saw a couple more. So Victoria Phillips with 55 knock. I don't know what knock are, but thank you very much. That's very kind. This is looking like another question perhaps you might want to answer, saying, is the meteor the sun that rises in the west? Is it heading for Asshai? Because I can't fathom what's so important for, and I can't, for whatever that is. It's not coming up on my computer.
What's so important for Dany there, she says. So there's like 3 good questions here. Thank you, Victoria, by the way. So the meteor is, Martin has this whole idea of a second sun, and he uses it several times. When Dunk sees a giant forest fire, he says, oh, it's like a sun rising in the west. When the Night's Watch saw Hardhome explosion, whatever that was, it was like a sun rising in the north. And a couple times when the dragons fight in The Princess and the Queen, it was like the sky was full of suns, or a sun was rising where it wasn't supposed to be. So this is a constant motif that Martin uses. And ultimately, it does refer to the meteor strike. Everything that causes a second sun effect is some sort of symbol or metaphor for the long night, moon explosion, meteor disaster. And so, because basically when a meteor comes into the atmosphere, it does become a second sun. It explodes in a blinding white flash for a moment. That's absolutely like the sun exploding. So that is a phrase that I believe is tied to the meteors. But then she also mentions what's so important for Dany to go to Asshai. You know, and she asks about the sun rising in the west and Quay's whole prophecy about what Dany needs to do and stuff. So Martin has said that originally he was intending for Dany to go to Asshai, and that he changed his mind about that. And so it seems to be, Quaid hinted that what's waiting for Dany is, quote, truth, which to me means some sort of knowledge about the Long Night or Lightbringer or the others or Azor Ahai, or, you know, something that she needs to learn for the last battle. And I think Martin decided that instead of, you know, 3 chapters of Dany on a boat, sailing to Asshai, and then sort of peeling back the entire curtain of mystery on Asshai by having people actually go there, what we're going to see instead is one or both of 2 things to give us a glimpse of Asshai, which is a Melisandre with some sort of flashback or memory, because she was there as a young person and maybe an adult. She has a little flashback about Melanie Lot 7 and this and that, and she hints about having sacrificed many things to gain her knowledge. So she'll probably give us a flashback. But what do you think of this, Robert? Marwyn the Mage seems to be able to use the glass candles at the Citadel. We know the Citadel has at least 4, if not more. And we know that most of the maesters don't pay any attention to him because they don't believe in magic. And Marwyn just apparently has one sitting in his office, you know, just lighting up, and he's just playing with it and stuff. And then the last thing we see from him is that he's hopping on a boat to go help Dany win the last battle. He's been using the glass candle to keep watch over everything happening in the north that Sam's been going under. So if you're Marwyn the Mage and you think the last battle's coming, and you're going to help Dany, and you think Dany's the savior of the world, and you have this glass candle technology, it's like, are you going to bring it with you? It's like, of course. So I have to assume that Marwyn is bringing one of the other glass candles with him. He's on his way to Slaver's Bay, which means that Dany's going to get her hands on the glass candle. There's no one better suited to use the glass candle than Dany. And I think it'll be a way for George to bring Dany to life as a full Valyrian sorceress dragon rider, and not just a dragon rider, because we see throughout Dany's arc that she's increasing her magic and her connection to the ancient dragon lords. And I would see her using a glass candle to get a vision of Asshai, maybe communicate with Quaithe, and that way she can learn whatever truth is waiting for her in Asshai, just in time to fight the last battle. And it's very much a parallel to Bran, sort of learning the knowledge he needs about the Dawn Age to win the last battle. So there you go.
I think that's excellent. I love that idea. I hadn't thought about it before, but yes, I think Marwyn definitely will be taking a glass candle with him. I think Sam will therefore probably end up with the glass candle that is in that room. I think that he may well keep it for himself rather than give it to Dany, but I think you're right that there's a chance that he may well show Dany how this is used. I could certainly see Dany coming into contact with a lot more of the ancient Valyrian magical artifact. So Dragonbinder obviously will at some point be coming into contact with her, and she was already musing in the last chapter of A Dance with Dragons about, hey, didn't the Valyrians have horns that they used to be able to guide dragons, because she's had a problem that Drogon wasn't doing what she wanted Drogon to do, and so she's thinking, wouldn't it be great if she had one of those ancient horns? So I think, yes, there's definitely a chance that she's going to get in contact with a lot of this. In terms of Asshai, I think you're right, we're not going to go there. I think I would need to look again at the exact wording, but I think that the fact that the interpretation that Danny put on it was not actually agreed by Quaithe. She said, why does she want me to go to Asshai? And I don't think Quaithe actually said you should go to Asshai. She just, or even nod at that. I think she just gave this to go west, you must go east kind of thing. So I think that was what she was trying to say. And I think it is the knowledge that comes from Asshai that she needs, rather than to actually physically to be going there. So yeah, how she gets that, perhaps it's the glass candle.
But I realized, I'm sorry, Robert, I realized I actually missed one part of the question. She's asking about the part of the prophecy where it says, not until the sun rises in the west. That could be one of those tricky wording things that is in fact talking about the moon meteor impact, which I think is coming in TWOW to trigger the new long night. That will be a sun potentially rising in the west if it's in that direction, and I would expect it to be heading towards Westeros, which is in the west. So yes, I totally think that could be the actual meaning of Quaithe's prophecy there. So yeah, and also Vanessa Cole sent in a super chat just thanking us for the good conversation, and Susan Dunkel sent in a thank you super chat as well. Thank you very much, both of you. And my friend Bron Steries sent in a $10 super chat and asked a question. Shall I go ahead and read that, Robert?
Well, first of all, I just want to quickly thank those people. So, Susan Dunkel, thank you very much for the super chat. That's great. And Vanessa Cole, I just want to give a quick shout out for Vanessa. That's very generous, $20. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I always try and point at this picture, which is so far away that nobody can actually see it, but it's one of Vanessa's pictures. She is an incredibly good Game of Thrones and Westworld artist, so I would highly recommend you go and have a look at her website. I don't know, Sonia, whether you could put up a link to that, but she's well worth going and having a look to. And she was actually on this live stream last week, a couple of weeks ago, and is really good value as well. But yeah, sorry, LML, there was something else you wanted to pick up on.
Oh, well, Bron Stage just sent in a question with a super chat and asked, are the references to cannibalism and blood drinking about literal ancient events, or are they metaphors for things like green seeing or weirwood sacrifice? Well, I do think there is actual blood drinking and cannibalism, and the idea that cannibalism is a way to absorb somebody's power in a magical sense is a pretty old idea that's around, and it feels like Martin is playing with that idea. So I would say, Bron Stairs, it's both. And that there are metaphors riding on the backs of these practices, but the practices themselves did seem to happen. And actual blood sacrifice, I do think that's how the first green seers went into the weirwood trees. When they were given a face, quote unquote, that means that at the same time as a face was carved into the weirwood, I think the first green seer gets their throat cut. And they sort of, through some sort of magical bond or ceremony, they're able to send that spirit into the tree, and that creates, a heart tree with a face with a green seer in it and all that. And then subsequent green seers can do the blood raven thing, essentially, eat the paste and sit under there. But I do have a theory about the first one needing a sacrifice, like Bran sees in his vision.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that is a unifying factor across pretty much all of magic in the world of Ice and Fire, is this idea of sacrifice in some way. And this is often a blood sacrifice, not always, but it often is. And so, yes, in the olden types of magic, it certainly seems to be that was the way, and the children of the forest did use sacrifice when they were casting the Hammer of the Waters. It's said that they sacrificed, I can't remember the exact number, but hundreds of people, and even of their own, that just in order to cast the magic, that's what they did. And we see sacrifices used by Euron and obviously by Melisandre, and all over the place is this idea of sacrifice you don't get magic for free. There's always a cost to it. At which point, I'm just going to very quickly, I do this every time, just do a quick update from my subscribers and patrons of stuff that's going on with me and on this channel, because I've launched a lot of stuff over the last couple of weeks, and I just want to quickly let people know what's going on. On this channel, I'm carrying on with my normal Thursday Game of Thrones live streams like this one. I've started up a couple of new video series, though. The first one I've had 3 or 4 episodes of now, which is Most Asked Questions, which is the questions that I have found Game of Thrones fans, Song of Ice and Fire fans have got. They're not newbie questions. They're questions just sort of kind of a nagging at the back of the brain kind of questions. So we've had, is Tyrion and Sansa actually still married? Can White Walkers cross water? Those kinds of, are Targaryens fireproof? Those kinds of questions that they're not obvious answers, and so I just try and get into them and actually provide an answer. And those are the kinds of things that I've heard many times come at me. I've also, I mentioned it a moment ago, just started a new series on Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy, and everything that happened there. Started last week with a video about the real causes, what I think the real causes of Robert's Rebellion were, and what the role was of Rickard Stark, Ned Stark's father, in all of that. The main thing, I've been saying it a lot recently, but if you've not found it, I've got a second channel, which is The Well Told Tale, which I have launched recently. I just uploaded the 3rd episode. It is just me reading, audio narrating the best science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction stories ever written. We're starting with The War of the Worlds. We're going to do Frankenstein next. It's 1 episode per week, every Wednesday, long form. So each of them so far have come in at about 3/4 of an hour each for the episode. I'm committed, no adverts in the middle. I'm never going to have adverts breaking up the flow of the story. So you can just listen to it long form. And at some point, I'm going to launch this one also as a podcast. So if you've not checked that out, please do. Those are being provided also for my $5 patrons over on this for for Deep Geek, because that's a thank you to you. I cannot do this without you, and so I just want to make sure you get access to that. Certainly for the foreseeable future, I just want to make sure that every single time I upload The Well Told Tale, that also goes to my patrons. So that's what's going on with me. If you're at all interested in supporting this channel or getting access to those things that I talked about and some other Patreon benefits, then please do go and check out my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/InDeepGeek. Also, please do check out my new channel. But LML, what's going on with you? Is there anything you'd like to sort of direct people towards?
Well, I'm so glad you asked me here. And that was a perfectly timed break, might I add, rather. So this Sunday, 3 Eastern, on the Lucifer Means Lightbringer temporarily demonetized YouTube channel, we will be having a live stream. It's actually going to be a live podcast, which means I'll be debuting the next episode of, it happens to be Signs and Portals #2, Sansa Locked in Ice. So that's 3 Eastern this Sunday. This is the new scripted episode. I'll be live performing it. I'll have Maester Mary with me to read the quotes, and I'll also have Sanrixian to do some excellent live drawing. And that's what I got going on. And of course, all of my stuff's at lucifermeanslightbringer.com. Got essays, and there's a link popping up in the chat there. Basically, I guess the thing to say is that I've got written essays on the website, which actually match the podcasts. So the way that I give it to you is that you can read it or listen to it based on whichever format you prefer. It's the exact same thing. When I do a live performance of a podcast, of course, there's a little more ad lib and we joke around and it's loose or whatever. But if you like to read, you can read it. If you like to listen, you can listen. And it's all about symbolism and stuff. I mean, if I sound like a crazy person, then you probably won't like my blog. And if what I'm saying sounds interesting, then you probably will really like it. So it's kind of a love it or hate it thing as far as symbolism and mythology and all that fun stuff goes. But thanks for having me on, Robert. Like I alluded to, I have had a little bit of YouTube problems lately, so it's nice to come on and hang out with you and everyone in the chat and just have a little good mojo. So we don't need to really bring the whole thing down with all the details of that. Suffice it to say that YouTube is frustrating sometimes, and I'm trying to resolve my problems with them, and I really appreciate all the support that I've gotten in the last 24 hours. I posted about my issues, and a bunch of new people signed up for Patreon that have been saying, oh, you know, I like your podcast. I've been listening a long time, just been meaning to sign up and never did. Saw your post. And so I've had a nice little surge in the last 24 hours that made me feel nice and give me the warm fuzzies. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for having me on, Robert, so I can have a little fun today.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I just want to echo something there. We don't need to go into the details of what's going on with the channel, but YouTube is very precarious for those of us who rely on it in any way for some sort of income. And what's happened to LML's channel is that he has been demonetized, so he can no longer get any money from the super chats or from any advertising income. It's just stopped including things that people have given him previously for super chats. They've just withheld the money, and that it's not clear at all what can be done about that and why. If I were to say something, and what I would highly encourage people to do is, if you like what LML does and if you want to support him, Patreon is probably, I think, the best way to do that. It's independent of YouTube. It provides a much more stable income, and this is why I'm always thanking my patrons, because I'm always very aware that the same thing could happen to this channel for reasons that I do not understand. If you care about supporting LML and want to help him carry on doing what he does, please do go over and check his Patreon page. And I'm sure one of my wonderful moderators will put the link up in a moment in the chat. So anyway, plugs over. Do check out, at the very least, go and check out LML's channel, because he does produce some excellent stuff.
Robert, thanks for the kind words. And let me just say that Patreon, people don't even realize, like, Patreon is holding this community together. Like, it makes what we do possible in a way that, I mean, I don't know, there'd be half as many content creators at best without Patreon. So Patreon is a San Francisco company, and I'm a Bay Area native. I feel a little bit proud of them. I don't know people at the company, but I know people who know them, and they seem to be a very good company that treats their employees well and runs a good operation. So let's just all keep our fingers crossed that continues to be the case, and they don't get big and start pulling a YouTube on people, because Patreon really does provide a stable income for us creators that allows us to do what we do. So yeah, if you like my stuff, if you like Robert's stuff, if you like anybody's stuff, sign up for Patreon. That's the best way for sure. But yeah, let's get back into some questions here. Forrest Balerta actually I had to repeat her question a couple times. I guess we missed it. She's asking, since Planetos would be the blue wanderer, quote unquote, or it could be, I guess, because of all the oceans, what god does it represent according to the faith, and what counter effects Planetos have on other wanderers? So the 7 celestial wanderers were traditionally counted to be the 5 planets that are visible from Earth, and which are the 5 closest in planets, as well as the sun and the moon. So the Earth itself was not counted one of the wanderers in classic mythology. And so I don't know or think that there's one of the faith of the 7 that is representative of the Earth. However, in the sort of mythical astronomy symbolism, where some people are suns and some are moons and some are comets, there are people that seem to represent the Earth. I have noticed that. And the children of the forest also sort of serve that role as sort of representing the Earth. And so certain players might play an elf character or a child of the forest character, and then that would be symbolic of that. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I'm not sure about having effect on other wanderers or what you're getting at there exactly, but yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And I'm going to bring this back down to some less celestial questions now, because I've had a couple more that I didn't answer that are perhaps more show questions. So I don't know whether you'll have views on these ones as well. Cornelia, one of my patrons, asked a question about a theory that I've not seen where this theory has come from, so there might be more evidence to this than is here. The theory that says Jon Snow is not in love with Daenerys and is only using her for a military alliance because he needs her army and dragons to save the North. The bit of evidence that Cornelia sort of points to here is the fact that when when Jon walked away from wherever it was, Eastwatch, he didn't turn around, which you would expect if he were madly in love with her. Then you would sort of turn around to have a last look at someone. I think this is quite an interesting one. I think that as far as the books are concerned, obviously that's still a long way away, them meeting. So I don't think we can draw too many conclusions there. But I think I can certainly see some hints in the Dany's visions in the House of the Undying that say that she will love him. I don't know that I've seen much by way of foreshadowing about him loving her, and I certainly think that there are some hints that there might be some betrayal going on there. Now, does this mean that on the show where we should be expecting Jon to suddenly turn around and betray her and say, "Actually, I didn't love you after all"? I don't know. I think that they seem to be and given the bizarre circumstances under which they met, they seem to be a reasonably well-matched couple, I have to say. But have you got any thoughts on this about the longevity of their relationship?
Well, longevity, I mean, I think most of the heroes are headed for heroic self-sacrifice. So I don't think, excuse me, I don't think there's going to be much longevity at all for anyone except for Sansa and a few other people. But what I do think is that if you look at Jon's character, I do think that he's in talking TV show. I do think that they're in love, and it's not in Jon's character to sort of pretend to seduce Daenerys when he doesn't really have feelings for her in order to win an alliance. That's just inconsistent with everything that Jon Snow's ever done. The idea of him walking away without looking back is, however, consistent with Jon Snow being a very stoic person who's constantly flagellating himself and punishing himself and saying that, oh, I can't do this thing that I really want. And I'm so awful for falling in love with you, Grit, which is like hilariously funny. So I think that that is actually consistent with Jon. So yeah, I think that's totally genuine on both of their parts. The only question is, how will it handle the circumstances when they find out that Jon's a Targaryen? When we find out how the people in the north and the south feel about their alliance, when the White Walkers attack, when Cersei attacks, there's going to be lots of stuff that will test them. And the last thing I'll say is that a lot of times celebrities date each other because people always want someone that they can relate to. And when you become a person in power or a celebrity or something, you kind of get isolated from most of society. And so you often end up with the people that you can relate to are somebody that's in your situation. And to me, I thought the show did a pretty good job of setting up the idea that Dany and Jon relate to each other as isolated leaders who basically have good hearts and good moral compasses. And they've had a chance to prove that to each other and win each other's mutual respect. And that's why, to me, the relationship is credible. And also because I just can't help shipping them.
Well, I don't ship them as much as others do, but I think you're right. I think there's also, they've set up, certainly on the show, the fact that if you had to try and draw out what Dany's kind of, the kind of guy she seems to go for, it would be a leader, someone who's a strong fighter and has some kind of moral code that is perhaps hard to find, but is definitely there. And that is Jon. And so that's very clearly there. And Jon himself, his type seems to be strong women. And so that makes perfect sense that he might like her too. So I totally get that. And also the leader thing, that they're both these individuals who have been carrying around this weight of leadership with them for the last few years, and finally have found somebody that they can relate to. I think that's a really powerful point. We did have a super chat just come in from Marilyn Bentley. Hi, Marilyn. Great to see you here. $15. That's very kind. Saying thank you for all you do. To everyone, please consider supporting these guys on Patreon. Most people can spare even $1 a month. 200 plus people are watching. Are they? Wow, that's good. 200 plus people are watching right now. Help them continue to do this. Thank you. That's really kind of you to say. Yes, as I say, this is not something I just made up. I say every single live stream. I cannot personally do this without the support of my patrons, and right now I think that if I were to encourage people to support anyone on Patreon, it would be my guest here today, LML, because I think he needs that in the light of what's happened recently. Another random one that I will certainly have a view on, Nicola Jurican, I saw you in the chat earlier. I don't know whether you're still watching live now. But has asked a couple of times, I think, on Twitter as well, saying, I believe Jaqen is Rhaegar. Why else would he let himself get caught, if not to get revenge on the Baratheons and the Lannisters? Now, I have strong views on this one, and my strong views, I'm afraid, Nicola, are to disagree completely. I think if you watched a video I put out just last week, to the question of whether Rhaegar is dead, I think the answer is very strongly yes. I think that all of the evidence says it, and there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that he's still alive somewhere. In terms of why Jaqen was in the black cells, I think that's an excellent question. I did do another video on this. It was a while ago, and it was following what was probably quite a convoluted set of sort of logical leaps, as it were. But I think, for me, all the evidence suggests that he was there because he had been hired by Littlefinger to assassinate Ned if Ned was not beheaded, which was a very strong possibility that he might not have been. That is my view. I think that there are lots of hints as to why that is the case, and I think that he was there because he was going to join the group of Night's Watch recruits on the way up. So that's my view. I don't think that there's any
cool
chance
theory.
that Rhaegar is Jaqen or Rhaegar is anyone. I think Rhaegar is flat out dead. But do you have thoughts on this one?
No, Rhaegar is definitely dead. But I love your Jaqen theory, though. I've never heard a satisfactory answer for why he was in there. But I was just thinking about that. Okay, so let's run with that idea that he was Baelish's backup plan to kill Ned, essentially. Wow, it's like, how truly effed was Ned? Like, it's like Peter tricked him into coming there, and he had like 3 different plans to kill him. And it's like, if one didn't go through, he has a fucking faceless man sitting in the dungeon. Like, damn, dude, Ned, there was no way out of that.
No, and well, so the starting point for the theory has to be everything for Littlefinger had to revolve around the fact Ned could not get to the north. If Ned got to the north, then he would immediately be able to tell people, yeah, Littlefinger betrayed me, and he would suddenly be the bad. He would no longer be able to hide in the shadows. He would not be able to get Catelyn back, which was his plan, or even get with Sansa, which became his plan. Everything would fall apart. So he had to stop Ned getting back up to the north. This plot got hatched for him to get sent up to the wall. He could not allow that to happen. We know that it was him whispering in the ear of Joffrey saying, why don't you actually behead him? But he couldn't be sure that would work. And so I think that, yes, this was his backup plan. We know that he knew about the Faceless Men because he talked about them and what prices they charged. We know he had links across to Braavos because his family came from Braavos, and we know that he had every reason to want Ned dead. So for me, it just falls into place and it makes sense. That's the only thing that I've found to actually explain that.
Hey, Robert, there was a really good question earlier that while we were answering a different question, asking about our opinion on Euron. And it occurred to me that I've never heard of, and we're talking book Euron because show Euron's really not that interesting. Cool, but not really, it's not really a lot to speculate on. But as far as book Euron goes, what's your quick take on where that's going in a supernatural sense, and how far is it going to go? Is he going to have anything to do with the others, and is he going to ride a dragon? And
yeah, so there's lots to talk about here. So book Euron.
Take off his glasses, folks.
I'm settling in now. So book Euron, we get some of his plans from the end of the books that we do have, and also 2 or 3 of the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter, or TWOW, as I know you call it, which I love. I must try and remember to call it TWOW again. But so Euron has got a plan. In the short, well, he's got a long-term plan and he's got a short-term plan. His short-term plan clearly is to get Victarion off over to Slavers Bay, and he knows that Victarion's going to try and betray him. But he thinks that as long as Dragonbinder is bonded to him, whoever blows it, the dragons are going to be bonded to him, Euron. So that seems to be part of the plan, is to get some dragons. Another part of the plan, however, is that he has been timing, and you can read between the lines about the fact that they've been holding back from a battle. He's been timing a huge battle with the Red Wine and Hightower fleets to happen at the same time as the huge battle is happening over in Slavers Bay. So if you've read those advanced chapters there, when you get Barristan Selmy riding out, having this huge battle outside Meereen, and then you get Victarion arriving, all of that is going to happen at the same time as this sea battle that Euron has manufactured to happen. And he has been strapping to the front of the boats all of these priests he's been collecting. Also, incidentally, the woman who is carrying his unborn child within her at the time. So there's also a little bit of king's blood going on there, the implication that these people are going to die. And this is effectively a massive sacrifice that is going to happen at the same time as Dragonbinder being blown. So he is performing some huge magic there. That's the sort of the backdrop of what's happening now. Yes, he's definitely trying to get a dragon. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But his bigger plan, if you read all of his crazy rants, he wants to be a god. That's what he's not. He is a crazy fool. You can't take his eyes off of him, and he's set his sights not just on being king of the land. He wants to be the god of the land.
Absolutely.
And the way that he thinks he's going to do this is by destroying all of these other priests and these other religions. He's going to level the ground, and he is going to be the one with all of the power, with all the magic, who can then become a god. So that's what he's trying to do. He sees himself sat on the Iron Throne with all of the dead gods surrounding him. That's what his aim is. And so where he's going to go, yes, I think he will team up with Cersei. I think that he will probably try and tie in somehow with the threat of the others as they come south. I could certainly see that going on. But he is working. He's not just being Cersei's puppet. He is working to his own agenda, which is to destroy the world almost, and from the ashes be the only one really standing who everybody is going to worship. So that's where I think his arc is going in the books, not in the show, sadly. In the show, he's going to turn up with the mercenary support from across the Narrow Sea, and will be a bit of a lackey for Cersei, and also get into a bit of a rumpus with Theon. That's his role. But yeah, in the books, completely different. He's trying to become a god.
That's a really cool answer. I mean, I've been sort of heard a lot of people talk about that general direction, but the idea that he's timing these two battles to happen as the horn is blown, that's pretty cool. I like that. That sort of matches the scope of his ambition, like you were saying. So that's a cool theory. And I'll also add that my friend Bran Steries has just started writing blog posts, and he's written his first blog about the theory that Nissa may have been pregnant when she was killed by Azor Ahai to work some sort of blood magic. And there is precedent for this idea of killing, a king and his child, 1 and then 2, so they both die. A king, like the king's blood thing, like you were saying. And when you were talking about Falia Flowers carrying Euron's seed and potentially headed for some sort of sacrifice to work blood magic, it definitely reminded me of Bran Steries' theory. And it's the idea of pregnant Nissa is very much something that's occurred to me before. It's pretty dark, like I said, but the whole thing is dark. We're talking about blood sacrifice, and also there's this idea of sacrificing babies to create magical beings, whether that's Craster's sons given to be turned into others or create others somehow. And then, of course, Melisandre takes Stannis's seed and soul, I guess, if you would say, to make the shadow babies. So it seems like there's a possibility that, you know, sacrificing babies to work magic is a thing, a very dark thing, but a thing.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think that there's definitely a Daenerys link across there to Nisa, which is too much of a digression for us to go into right now.
And obviously Dany's baby, right? We're right
Yeah.
before the dragons were hatched, right? Duh, it's the obvious one.
So I just wanted to very, very quickly pause because
there's a super chat.
There is, but before we do
them.
that, there's something that I promised I would do, and I know that I'm going to forget if I don't do later. Guys, one of my other favorite people in the community, Azora Hype, is live streaming as well. He's going to live stream starting at some point around now. Obviously, I'm doing this, so I don't know when that is. And I said I would send people over to him when we're done. If I forget later, go over. If you want more Game of Thrones content, go and check out his live stream. He's an excellent guy, so I would highly recommend you go over there and give him my very best regards as well while you're at it. But yes, we did have a couple of super chats. Kerry McDonald, thank you so very much. Just saying, just wanted to help a little, and hi to everyone. And before that, we had another one that I shall just try and scroll to, which was Lena Snow, saying, are the fate of the Starks mirrored by their wolves? Bran and Sansa are fated by GRM to die. This is an excellent question. This was one of the first videos I ever did, was about the link between the direwolves' names and the Starks, and I think that for me is where the link is, rather than the fate of each of the wolves is the fate of their owner. I think it's the name of the wolf tells you about the fate of the owner. So, for example, you get the classic example is Shaggy Dog, a Shaggy Dog story being a long, rambling story that seems like it's going to have some point, but actually ends up with not much meaning at all to it, and that seems to match up with what Rickon's story is within this. Jon's direwolf is called the Ghost, which is obviously the continued presence of somebody after they died, and that clearly maps onto his story. I think, therefore, you get the hints we get with the two that we have that you mentioned there with Sansa. Hers was called Lady, and I think that we shouldn't look to the fact that Lady died. I think that we should look to the fact that Lady was called Lady, and that actually was Sansa's fate, to be the Lady of Winterfell, to be the ruling Stark, as it were. And Bran's direwolf Summer, I think, shows that what he is about bringing about summer. He is about bringing about the end of winter, of the long night. I think that is his role, is to help bring about that. So that's my take on it. It's not the fate of the wolf which is mapped across to the fate of the owner. It is the name of the wolf that is mapped across to the fate of the owner. Did you have anything to add on to that one?
No, I totally agree. Although it does seem like there's some show and book canon mixing, because Summer isn't dead in the books, only in the show. So that wouldn't be a GRM foreshadowing, because GRM has not killed Summer, and I don't know that he will. And before Bran dies, anyways. But I do agree with everything that you just said. Yeah. So sorry for people who wanted me and Robert to argue again, but we're getting along fine today, and I don't even feel the need to interrupt you. So.
Yes, it's just because we're both talking sense. What's the matter? Okay, so let's do my last one that I had coming up before this, which was Maria Lind, who again I think I saw in the chat somewhere. So hi Maria, good to see you. And I think this was the first response when I put out my tweet just saying, hey, what shall I live stream about today? Came back with this one, so I think it's probably only fair that I reply to this one. Suggested that we do a live stream about the Great War aftermath, the future of House Stark and the other major houses after the Great War is over. How much of Westeros survives? So I think I will sort of recast this one rather than doing a full live stream on this, just to recast this for a question. How many of the great houses do you think, LML, how many do you think will survive and be great houses in some way after all the dust has settled and we're sort of in the looking forward to the aftermath?
Oh, I think the houses will survive. It's just a matter of in what form. Like, even if all the Lannisters die, somebody with blonde hair will conquer the Rock and claim the name Lannister because it's just it's a brand. It's a successful brand. And I think, so it might be Gendry, Baratheon, or something like that. Hey, Robert, are you there? Your screen is frozen to me. Guys, can you see Robert, or is this still live? What's happening? Robert is frozen to me. I'll wait for the chat to catch up and tell me just what's happening here. It might be just me on the chat. But I just, I think that, oh, there you are.
Okay, well, I think I'm here. Can you hear me again now?
Yes.
Excellent. Loving this little professional moment when we're just trying to check whether the other person's still online. Guys, why don't we...
All I knew, I was the only one. I was like in my basement and the call was dropped and I'm just talking to a screen now. I have no idea. But yeah, so I think the Iron Throne won't survive. Or at least I think that's a good possibility that they won't survive. But the houses will. I think it's far more likely that we'll have 7 kingdoms again, or even more than we will a one kingdom. So
yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I don't think we're going to have the Iron Throne survive. I think that's the point I would make. I think it's an entirely valid point about the brands of the great houses will survive. I think that there's certainly a chance that some of the great houses that we had coming into it perhaps won't survive in the sense of what we have. So, for example, House Martell may well not, if House Martell gets gutted in the same way on the show as it seems to have on in the books as it seems to have done in the show. I could certainly see the Tyrells, if they find themselves on the wrong side of the battle, they could go the same way. House Baratheon, I could see that, and maybe even House Arryn. So I think there's a lot of houses that are sort of teetering on the edge. Yes, you can get a lot of random cousins and people coming in, and there is always an heir. This is one of the things about how this system works, is that you can always try and work out who is the next in line to whatever it is, even if they are incredibly removed from the person who was previously the lord or lady of that house. There is always somebody next. So yes, they could do, but the way of these things seems to be that whenever there's this huge shift, whoever is in control afterwards then gets to divvy out the rewards. And if somewhere is empty, like, to take a slightly smaller house but still quite a significant one, House Frey, on the show, as far as we can tell, House Frey has been largely wiped out. Then that means that whoever happens to be in charge at the end of all of this can give the twins to someone. And the best theory that I've had on this one is that the foreshadowing in the show with Bronn being promised 2 castles, that seems to be a sensible place for him to be given as his reward for whatever fine service he does. So that's my view. I'm now thinking that it's LML. You've gone.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. You were just very still for a moment.
Very still, yeah.
That's fine. Just concentrating on what I was saying. That's excellent. So
I'm actually doing a pretty good job of like maintaining touch with some people on the chat here. there's some good questions that are floating up, and just want to give them some
Fantastic.
love.
Well, why don't you pick out another question for us? Because I think that's I think we sort of rounded off that one. The answer, broadly speaking, is that there is always an heir to somewhere. So a house is very rarely completely wiped out, but it's a matter of who's in charge afterwards that gets to divvy up who owns which castles and things like that.
Will Carter is asking a TV show question. Said, "What castle will Bran get?"
Well, that yeah, I answered that one. I think he will get the twins. Okay. I think that is it would be too much to give him one of the big great castles.
I like that. I like that.
But if he's been promised 2 castles, that is 2 castles. But it's rather than being 2 castles in different places, he can control the twins, and that makes sense to me. It's just it's quite well rounded. So yeah, that's what I think he will end up with.
Oh, okay. Here's a really cool high magic tech question from Robar Baratheon. He says, if Night's King is slain, it's possible he could escape through a second unlife by jumping into another body. And that's certainly a fantasy trope, you know, the wizard that you kill him, but he jumps back into his soul jar or into something or other. So he's saying maybe Valyrian steel is needed to eat him, because if you think about Lightbringer, which was forged in blood and fire, just like Valyrian steel, Lightbringer actually absorbs the soul and the life of Nissa Nissa when it stabs her. There's like a soul-sucking sword thing going on, which is another fantasy trope. So maybe the idea of using Valyrian steel is you're snuffing it out, you know, for good or whatever. So I don't know that George usually thinks about magic in quite that technical a way. If so, maybe that's like the limit of what he could think about it. But yeah, that's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. We have yet to see Valyrian steel kill others in the books at all. I think that it will, but we haven't seen it yet. So you know, the Winds of Winter were probably, or Tiwao as I like to call it. That's the stripper name, I guess, for the Winds of Winter. Tiwao, or like the Jersey Shore name. That's what it is. But we're going to go further north than ever before. If Jon comes back to life well, he will come back to life in the books, but he's not going to be same old Jon like he is in the show. He's going to be more Cold Hands like, or more Barrack like, and he'll be headed north at some point. I think the whole point of Jon becoming an undead person is so that he, like Cold Hands or like Benjen in the TV show, will be able to handle the extreme cold of the north. And that's called the Green Zombie series, or Green Zombie Theory, rather. And I've got a series called Sacred Order of Green Zombies about that. But basically, the whole idea, Robert, is very practical. If you're a zombie, you don't have to eat, you don't have to sleep, you don't have to stay warm, which pretty much makes you ideally suited to handle the frozen dead lands where there's nothing to eat and it's very cold. And you see that in the books, like with Cold Hands. Like he might have been ranging up there for who knows how many decades or centuries, because he's a white. He doesn't need to eat. So he's all good. You know, it's the ideal package for dealing with the North. So I think that's the whole reason why Jon is being turned into a zombie in the books, so that he can go north and deal with the others. I'm sure he'll have Valyrian steel. So we'll get to see what happens.
Yeah, or perhaps Ghost could. I think that there's a couple of possibilities there. I think that Jon will have a role south of the wall in the books as he does on the show. So whether there's time for him to be going ranging all that way forward, I don't know.
That would be at the very end, I would say.
Yeah, perhaps at the very end. I think the point that I would make is, this is sort of dropping back a little bit in the conversation, but what I really hope that the show doesn't do is just end this all with a big battle and the Night King get killed. That
bad news for you, Robert.
Is the way it's gonna. It should go. I think that we need to understand how the Night King was. This is show lore. We haven't got all of this bit in the books yet, but why and how the Night King was created has to have something to do with how it is ended, not just well, we need to find out which type of sword can kill him. So I think that we need to have a more satisfactory and slightly less fighty ending to this, that the pacifist George R.R. Martin would actually be happy with. I cannot see him enjoying or writing this huge magnus opus about battles and war, that shows that battles and war are the solution to it all. I think that he is going to show us that battles and war cause suffering, and actually the best way is for people to sit down and talk to each other and understand what is going on the other side. So I think there's another layer that certainly will happen in the books, and I hope happens a little bit in the show.
Yeah, so someone in the chat named Muse Ingenuine has asked the $64,000 question, as I've labeled it, which is, does dead sperm still work? Does dead people sperm? Is that a thing? In the show, it seems that resurrected Jon is just brought back to life and he can get Dany pregnant. In the books, it's far more dubious that is going to be possible. The one thing that I think is that it's possible there's a third kind of resurrection that we haven't seen besides ice and fire resurrections, and that would be the Green Seer resurrection, because it's heavily foreshadowed when Bran is like, oh, my dad heard me. He heard me in the vision. And the Child of the Forest is immediately like, do not attempt to call him back, because, by the way, you can't. And it's like, really? Then why are you telling him not to do it? So there's this foreshadowing that that Bran might raise somebody from the dead, and or that Green Seers can raise people from the dead. And so if Jon is raised in part, not just by Melisandre in the books, but perhaps with Bran's help, maybe he will be a better zombie that can still have, active sperm that can swim. And that was a sperm swimming hand gesture there. So yeah. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think I like it, but I am of the view about whether this counts as part of your green zombie idea. I don't know. So I think in the books, Jon will be brought back by a combination of his warging into Ghost and staying alive through warging into Ghost, and also his body being brought back as it was on the show by Melisandre using the kind of the fire white method. So I think what we will see is that, yes, his body is a resurrected fire white, and George R. R. Martin has gone on the record saying that Beric Dondarrion was there to prepare the way for Jon, so that we expect that and we understand what's going on. So I think there's clearly that element happening, but he is not going to be like Beric, in that Beric loses parts of him and his personality because of this process, because Jon has been out warging as Ghost. So yes, when people warg, they do slowly over a long period of time lose part of who they are, but a lot more of him will be there still when he comes back. So he is going to be brought back not as a different kind of magic, but by the combination of two kinds of magic, in a way that we've already seen, again, more book stuff than show stuff, but Beric himself is often shown as being, yes, very much being brought back time and again using the fire magic, but he's also sitting there in a weirwood tree throne, so he's representative a lot of this other green seer magic. So there's a mixture of the two, and this for me is about the overarching themes of this. I say this as much as I possibly can. Jon is not ice to Dany's fire. Jon is the balance. Dany is the figurative fire. The dragons are the figurative fire. The others, the White Walkers, are the figurative ice. Jon is there to be shown as the balance, the great conciliator, the people who brings people together. So that is his role. And so, yes, it makes sense when he is brought back. It is through a combination of both kinds of magic.
Okay, so yes, that is a great answer. First of all, Jon is Mithras, and Mithras is one of his big things is handshakes and deal making. And when I say Jon is Mithras, I mean that Mithras, his symbolism is grafted onto Jon pretty hard. For example, Mithras had a white bull that was his own personal spirit animal that was part of him, but also his best friend. He had to slay the white bull in order to be reborn. And to me, it seems very likely that when Jon goes into Ghost's body, that the only way to get his spirit out of Ghost will be to sacrifice the wolf body. So you made a point about the idea that when a green or a skin changer dies and goes into his animal and during second life, what happens is that over time, his spirit starts to merge with the animal spirit, and he becomes less a man and more a wolf. And so what I think is going to happen with Jon is just what you said. It's going to go into the wolf, the body's resurrected, and then we somehow have to get the spirit out of the wolf and back into the resurrected body. That's probably going to involve burning the wolf or sacrificing the wolf. But the silver lining for dog lovers, which is, of course, I'm a big animal lover, is that by this time, I believe that the spirit of Jon and Ghost will have merged to the point where they're inseparable. And so they will both be going back into Jon's body, which means that Jon's wolf is his ghost, and his ghost will merge with his wolf ghost. And so the resurrected Jon will be like Ghost Jon, and it will be both the wolf and Jon. So he'll be the wolf man, quote unquote, at that point. And I wouldn't be surprised if he had red eyes like Ghost used to. So he'd look almost like a white, but he'll be a red-eyed white. I think that's possible. And the last layer that I'll throw at you is that I don't consider green seer magic to be ice magic, but rather, green or earth magic. And so if you wanted to see all the magics at work, what if Jon's corpse is first raised as a white, like a cold white? And what if Melisandre and other people, maybe Bran, have to actually drive out the other's energy, much in the way the show depicts Dragonglass sort of driving out the White Walker energy from Benjen and saving him? What if Jon's body rises with blue star eyes and then somehow it's driven out so that, his spirit can go back into it? I'm not sure that that's going to happen by any means, but it seems like something that's in play. Maybe they'll stick his body in an ice cell. It'll sit there for a week or a few days. At some point, it could rise on its own. That would be freaky.
Yeah, and at the risk of a huge digression, I love the idea that he might come back with red eyes, because if he comes back with red eyes and his body is deathly white, he will look like Ghost, who has got a white pelt and red eyes, and also Bloodraven and lots of other characters
Elric of
in the
Melnibone.
show. So if in doubt, blame Bloodraven. It all comes back to him. We had, and guys, I think I want to carry on for about 10 more minutes. So if you've got any more questions, now's the time to drop them in there. But we had a super chat from Brian Price. Again, thank you very much, Brian. It's very generous of you, saying, what's the biggest takeaway of A Song of Ice and Fire for society today? That is a big question. I think where I would start with that is to say that George R.R. Martin has written this not as an allegory, but as something which is applicable. And this is something he's picked up on. J.R.R. Tolkien, incidentally, was very strong on this. He didn't like C.S. Lewis. His great friend C.S. Lewis wrote things that he considered to be allegory, and we probably would all agree that they're quite strong allegory. J.R.R. Tolkien said he wanted to write stories that were applicable, that you could draw out meanings and messages from. And so the meanings and messages you can draw out from it will change over time and in different areas. So I think, Brian, I'm probably telling you things that you already know, but this for me is one of the joys of A Song of Ice and Fire, is that it's not just one message. There are many, many different things that we can try and draw out. But LML, obviously ask you just as you're drinking, but what would be a message or a takeaway that you would take from A Song of Ice and Fire for today's world?
Okay, so one of the things I talk about a lot is something called the fire of the gods. And I'm referring to it in the sense of the Prometheus or the Lucifer or the Adam and Eve myth, where the fire of the gods represents the knowledge of the gods. In the Garden of Eden, for example, everyone knows there's a tree and it's got fruit and they're not supposed to eat from it. And the snake's like, hey, you really should eat from it. But what the tree is actually called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And supposedly before Adam and Eve eat the fruit, they don't know the difference between good and evil. They're basically incapable of sinning. They're in almost like an animal-like state where they don't even have the choice to sin. Which is a bit of a paradox, because choosing to eat the fruit is a choice to sin, apparently. But setting that aside, the idea is that this tree actually is it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And not Satan, but the snake rather, says, if you eat this fruit, you'll be like God, having the knowledge of good and evil. And that's exactly what happens. they eat the fruit, they become aware of their own sin and shame, and so they have the urge to wear clothes all of a sudden. But setting that aside, the whole idea of the knowledge and fire of the gods, it can stand for anything. It can be Lightbringer, it can be the meteor magic, it could be the weirwood magic. You know, that's the fire of the gods. Bran is becoming like a god by tapping into the weirwood net. It gives him all these astral projection abilities. But the way that translates into modern society is, well, for us, it's technology. That's our fire of the gods. And the whole idea of man reaching for the fire of the gods is, what will we do with it? How will we handle it? The fire of the gods can go different ways. Anytime, it's basically just power. Like with our technology, we can cure the sick and prolong life and enhance health. We can recycle things and purify things and improve the environment. We can reconstruct the marshlands along the Gulf of Mexico after the hurricanes and the soil erosion, tear it up. We can do great things with science, but we can also make nuclear weapons, to name the most obvious thing. And so this is our test in our generation, is we have chemistry, we have science, and it makes us very powerful. We can go to space. We can blow up the entire earth. We can pollute the oceans. We can leave the earth a toxic wasteland that won't be right again for 10,000 years if we do the wrong thing. So that, to me, is the message about power and dealing with that fire of the gods that really, really translates well into any time and era. But that's specifically how it translates in our era.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point. I think for me, one thing I would draw out is this idea that we see again and again, which is that while the big and powerful people are doing what they want to do, the people who suffer are the powerless. And I think that that is going to come out more and more in the books the further in we get, is that you see that although we've been following the stories of all of these noble lords and ladies and their politicking and whether they're paying attention to things happening north of the wall or not, actually, when we stop, we will see that the people who get impacted most on this are the people who are just slightly off camera. We get the farmers whose livelihood is destroyed by war. We get the families who lose husbands or brothers or whatever going off and fighting. You get this idea of Dany randomly saying, hey, she's going to send over the dragons and they're just going to burn down King's Landing, and it's the heroes of this, and I don't use that word too lightly, are the people who point out the real world impacts of these things. The people that we love are the people like Davos, when he gets really impassioned about innocent people suffering, like Shireen on the show, or Tyrion when he is there trying to persuade Daenerys not to be firebombing King's Landing because of all the innocent people who would die. So that, I think, is for me the big lesson for today's world, is that we mustn't forget the powerless. We must always be thinking, what are the impacts that have the big level things that are going on in this world? What are the impacts on the people who do not have the power to protect themselves? For me, that is the big message. But there are many big messages which are drawn out by this. Guys, I said I was wanting to draw this to a close. Is there one more question that you've seen, LML, that you think it would be a really good one?
Yeah, for us to absolutely. There's one about, what do we think will happen to Gilly's baby monster? He's asking show only, but I would actually expand that and say both, maybe different answers. But yeah, that seems like a really important baby. The baby promised to the others that wasn't given to the others. And I think this is actually a super important thing, because to me, the original others were made by the original Knights, King and Queen. And I've got a whole theory about that in the Moons of Ice and Fire series, if anybody wants to check that out. But I think there was originally a baby that was meant to be turned into an other, just like Monster, that wasn't. And I think that baby became a Stark, and that is why the Starks have a blood connection to the others, because the Starks have like unactivated other blood in their veins. They're the blood of the other, just like the Targaryens are the blood of the dragon, in my opinion. And so whatever happens to Monster is actually going to be super important, in my opinion. Not so I don't know that. What I'm saying is that Monster will be an important echo for this original Stark, this original stolen other baby. I'm not sure that Monster is going to do anything unless he's somehow sacrificed to work magic or something. But I think we'll see him set up like maybe adopted by the Starks to give us this idea that the stolen other baby gets absorbed into the Stark bloodline. So we'll see him perhaps adopted at Winterfell. And in fact, that's one of the things that Jon thinks about doing, is sending Gilly's baby Monster to Winterfell to, basically like he was sent to Winterfell. What do you think, though, Robert?
I'll hold my hands up and say that this is on my list of things that I want to investigate further, because I don't feel that I've yet got a full answer in my mind as to the significance, because Monster clearly has got significance in the books. On the show, I will say I do not think that there's going to be much happening at all. To be honest, I think they've not developed the point in any way, shape, or form. They've not mentioned where the baby came from again, as they normally do. If there's something that they're going to be building on in future seasons, they would have mentioned last season. Oh yeah, we've got this baby that surely was going to be turned into one of the White Walkers, but hey, that's fine. They've not done that, so I think that basically we're just going to see Monster carried around by Gilly until the end of season 8. In the books, I would agree there's a lot more symbolic stuff going on there, and I do wonder whether the symbolism is the new start symbolism. This was a baby whose fate had been written for it. It was going to be handed over against its will. It was a baby. It had no choice in this whatsoever to be turned into one of the White Walkers, to be given over to the others. But it is a new start. And so I think that as part of this set of cripples, bastards, and broken things who will inherit the world, I think that this will be Monster will be one of the people who have this second chance, and one of the few babies that we've actually seen growing up that will therefore be the next generation going forward.
Team Monster lives.
Okay, guys, I am going to wrap this one up now. Thank you so much, particularly for the super chats and also all the kind words. I just want to repeat what I said before. Guys, I would highly recommend you go and check out LML's channel. I'll give him a moment just in a second to say where we can find him. But please, if you like what he does and you wish to support what he does, I would highly recommend you go and check out his Patreon page, which is probably something like patreon.com/Lucifer means Lightbringer, but somebody I'm sure will put the link down in there. LML, where can people find you on the internet?
So, Patreon works. It's pretty easy. If you get to patreon.com and start typing in Lucifer something, you will find me. And I also have a Patreon tab at the top of lucifermeanslightbringer.com. So that's all easy to find. In fact, if you start typing Lucifer and Lightbringer into the search box, you will basically find mostly my stuff. And as I always say, a couple of websites that you shouldn't click on. So I'm easy to find. And the big thing is this Sunday, 3 Eastern at Lucifer Means Lightbringer YouTube channel, we'll be doing the new podcast, Signs and Portals 2, Sansa Locked in Ice. That is what it will be. It'll be about Sansa on her way to the Eyrie and all the symbolism of her fleeing from King's Landing and ending up in the Eyrie. She's doing kind of a fire to ice thing from the Purple Wedding to the Vale, and lots of great symbolism going on. So I will look forward to seeing you all then. Maester Mary and Sanrixian will be with me. And yes, I'll just thank again everyone who just has signed up for Patreon in the last day or so, just as a show of support. Really means a lot. It's picked up my spirits. So it's given me new energy to keep going and turning out good work. So yes, thank you very much. And thanks for having me on, Robert. It's always fun. I think I pretty much got through this without really interrupting you for the most part. Might be some sort of record.
This is very impressive. No, a dream guest as always, LML. And if I just pick up on Mary and Stephen, I just wanted to say I just spotted both became patrons of mine during this live stream. So thank you very much. That's incredibly generous of you.
Nice.
Guys, do check out LML stuff. He really does produce some excellent content. If you're interested in supporting this channel, please do check out my Patreon page. And please also, if you're interested in audio narrations of some great science fiction stories, then please also check out my second channel, which is called The Well Told Tale. Thank you so much. Great chat. As always, I'll be back this time next week for another live stream. I think I've got Sir Hunts on next week, which should be good fun. We'll come up with a good topic for that as well. But thank you again, LML, for coming on. Thank you so much for the great chat. And guys,
Azor Hype is just going live now. I just want to remind you.
Oh, yes. And Azora Hype, go to Azora Hype. Give him my very best wishes and tell him what a handsome devil he is. Thank you very much, everyone, and I shall see you again next week. Take care.
Cheers.